Sometimes, the quietest voice is the one that changes a life forever. Ethan Carter had one polished shoe inside his black SUV and one hand resting on the open door when he heard it. "Please, if I fall asleep, my mommy will be alone." The words were barely louder than the winter wind drifting between the tall buildings of downtown Chicago, so soft they might have disappeared into the traffic if they had reached anyone else's ears. But they reached his. They settled somewhere beneath the armor he had spent years building around his heart, freezing him more completely than the December air ever could. His driver glanced into the rearview mirror, waiting for the familiar signal to pull away, but it never came. Ethan remained perfectly still, staring ahead as though the city itself had stopped moving. Behind him, office workers hurried toward warm apartments, couples laughed beneath glowing storefront lights, and taxis splashed through melting patches of snow left from the afternoon storm. Nobody slowed down. Nobody turned around. It was another ordinary evening in a city where everyone had somewhere to be. Ethan usually admired that rhythm. It matched his own life. Every minute scheduled. Every decision measured. Every emotion locked neatly behind quarterly reports and board meetings. At 45, he had built one of the largest logistics companies in America, owned homes he rarely visited, collected awards that gathered dust, and lived in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan where silence greeted him every night. People called him disciplined, focused, unshakable. They never called him happy because no one who truly knew him had used that word in years. He almost convinced himself he had imagined the whisper. He started to close the door. Then it came again, weaker this time. "Please, don't leave yet." His fingers loosened from the handle before his mind could object. Slowly, he turned. At first he saw nothing except a narrow stretch of sidewalk hidden beside a concrete parking structure where the glow of a single street lamp barely reached. Then he noticed the small figure sitting against the wall. A little girl, no older than 7, wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie that swallowed her tiny shoulders. She hugged an old blue backpack against her chest as if it contained the last important thing she owned. Her blonde hair escaped from beneath a knitted beanie, damp from the evening mist, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. She wasn't asking strangers for money. She wasn't calling for help. She was simply trying to keep her eyes open. Every few seconds her head dipped forward before she forced herself awake again. Ethan had negotiated billion-dollar contracts with steady hands, but something about watching that child fight sleep made his heartbeat stumble. He walked toward her without realizing he had left the warmth of the car behind. As he drew closer, she looked up with tired blue eyes that carried far more worry than a child should ever have to hold. She offered a tiny, apologetic smile, almost embarrassed that he had stopped. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was trying to stay awake." Ethan crouched until they were nearly eye level. "Why?" he asked gently. The girl tightened her arms around the backpack and glanced toward the dark street beyond them. "Because if I fall asleep," she answered, her voice trembling with quiet determination instead of fear, "I might miss the call telling me my mommy needs me." For a long moment, Ethan did not answer. The city continued breathing around them. Headlights drifting across wet pavement, trains rumbling in the distance, strangers wrapped in scarves walking past without ever noticing the little girl beneath the fading street lamp. She lowered her eyes as though she regretted speaking at all. "You do not have to stay," she said softly. "I just wanted someone to hear me before I got too sleepy." Ethan swallowed. "What is your name?" She hesitated for only a second. "Lily. Lily Bennett." "I am Ethan." She gave a tiny nod, clearly recognizing neither his face nor the expensive coat he wore. It was oddly refreshing. Everyone else seemed to know exactly who he was before he ever introduced himself. Lily simply saw another person standing in front of her. "Why are you waiting here by yourself?" he asked. Her fingers tightened around the worn blue backpack resting against her knees. "Because my phone battery died." She reached into the front pocket and carefully pulled out an old flip phone with a cracked screen. The hospital said they might call if my mommy wakes up. I did not want to miss it. Ethan looked at the tiny device before looking back at her. You have been waiting out here this whole time? She nodded. Since it started getting dark. Did anyone come to check on you? Another small shake of her head. There was no anger in her expression, only simple acceptance, as if disappointment had become something ordinary. Ethan glanced toward the hospital district several blocks away, then back to the little girl whose eyelids were growing heavier by the minute. Have you eaten dinner? Lily smiled politely, almost as though she wanted to spare him from worrying. I had crackers this afternoon. They were enough. The answer landed harder than he expected. He remembered expensive dinners waiting untouched on the dining table in his penthouse, meals prepared by chefs that often ended up thrown away because another meeting had lasted too long. Without thinking, he slipped off his wool overcoat and gently draped it across Lily's shoulders. She looked startled. You will be cold. I will be fine, he replied. You need it more than I do. She carefully held the coat closed, burying her small hands inside sleeves that extended far beyond her fingertips. For the first time, a hint of warmth returned to her pale cheeks. Ethan noticed she still refused to let go of the backpack. What is so important in there? He asked quietly. Lily looked down at it with remarkable tenderness. Everything. There was something about the way she answered that kept him from asking another question. Instead, he stood and extended his hand. Come with me. She stared at his hand but did not take it immediately. Are you taking me away? She whispered. No. His voice was calm and certain. I am taking you somewhere warm where your phone can charge and where you can answer if the hospital calls. Lily searched his face for several long seconds, as though measuring whether promises could still be trusted. Finally, she placed her tiny hand inside his. It was colder than the winter air itself. As they walked toward the waiting SUV, Ethan realized he had canceled countless meetings with a single phone call over the years, yet somehow this unexpected stop on a freezing Chicago sidewalk already felt more important than every appointment waiting on tomorrow's calendar combined. Lily climbed carefully into the back seat, still holding Ethan's hand until she was safely inside. The warmth from the heater slowly filled the quiet cabin, fogging the edges of the windows while soft instrumental music played almost unnoticed through the speakers. She looked around with wide, uncertain eyes, as though she had stepped into a different world. The leather seats, the gentle lighting, even the clean scent of cedar seemed unfamiliar to her. Ethan closed the door and slipped into the seat beside her instead of taking his usual place in the front. His driver glanced back, surprised, but Ethan simply said, "The nearest 24-hour cafe, please." The vehicle eased into traffic without another question. For several blocks neither of them spoke. Lily rested both hands on the faded backpack in her lap, never loosening her grip for even a second. Ethan noticed the careful way she protected it, not with fear but with devotion, as though everything she loved traveled inside that worn fabric. You really care about that backpack, he finally said with a gentle smile. Lily nodded. Mom says important things do not always look important. The sentence lingered in the silence. Ethan looked out the window as the lights of Chicago drifted past in long golden reflections. He remembered hearing similar words from his own mother decades ago before illness had quietly changed everything. It was a memory he had trained himself not to revisit, yet somehow this little girl had opened its door with a single sentence. A few minutes later the SUV stopped outside a small neighborhood cafe where warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. Inside, only a handful of customers remained, quietly finishing late dinners while fresh coffee filled the air with comforting warmth. Ethan guided Lily to a booth near the window. A waitress approached with a welcoming smile, and before Ethan could open the menu, Lily spoke almost apologetically. May I please have hot chocolate? Without whipped cream. It costs less that way. The waitress looked toward Ethan, whose expression softened immediately. "Bring whatever she would enjoy," he replied. "And a bowl of chicken noodle soup." Lily looked down at the table. "That is too much." "No," Ethan answered quietly. "It is exactly enough." While they waited, Lily carefully unzipped her backpack just far enough to pull out a small charging cable. Ethan handed her his phone charger without hesitation. She connected the old phone, watching the tiny battery symbol finally appear on the screen. Relief spread across her face in a way that surprised him. Most children her age would have smiled over dessert or presents. Lily smiled because her phone had enough power to receive one important call. The hot chocolate arrived first, sending curls of steam into the air. She wrapped both hands around the mug but did not drink immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment, quietly enjoying the warmth against her fingers. Ethan realized she was stretching out the feeling, making it last. Then the soup arrived, followed by fresh bread. Lily whispered a sincere thank you, before taking the smallest bite imaginable, eating slowly as though she had learned never to assume there would always be another meal. Ethan watched without saying a word. Success had taught him how to measure profits, growth, and market value, but sitting across from Lily, he found himself measuring something entirely different. Gratitude. Hope. Quiet courage. Just as the cafe settled into peaceful silence, Lily's phone vibrated gently against the table. Both of them looked down at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed only 2 words. Memorial Hospital. The sound of the phone seemed louder than everything else in the cafe. Lily looked at the screen with trembling hands but did not answer immediately. She looked at Ethan instead, as though asking permission without using words. He gave her a small encouraging nod. "Go ahead." She pressed the green button and lifted the phone to her ear. With both hands. "Hello?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. For a few seconds she only listened. Then the worried lines on her small face softened. "Really?" She opened her eyes. A smile appeared so suddenly that it almost looked unfamiliar on her face. "Yes, I can come. Thank you. Thank you so much." She ended the call carefully, holding the phone against her chest before looking up at Ethan. Her blue eyes glistened with hope. "My mommy woke up for a little while," she said. "The nurse said she asked if I was safe." Ethan felt an unexpected weight settle in his chest. "Then we should go see her." Lily nodded, but her smile quickly faded. She looked toward the half-finished bowl of soup sitting in front of her. "Can I take the rest with me?" she asked quietly. "Mom always says hospital food is better when someone you love is eating too." Ethan smiled for the first time that evening. "Of course." The waitress happily packed the soup and bread into a small paper bag while refusing to let Lily carry it herself. Minutes later they stepped back into the crisp winter air. Snowflakes had begun drifting down again, catching the glow of the streetlights like tiny floating stars. Inside the warm SUV, Lily carefully placed the bag beside her backpack, making certain nothing would spill. During the short drive to Memorial Hospital, she spoke more than she had all evening. She told Ethan how her mother used to read library books aloud every Friday night, even when they could not afford many other things. She described making pancakes shaped like smiling faces on Saturday mornings and collecting colorful autumn leaves during walks through Lincoln Park. Every memory centered on simple moments, yet Lily spoke about them as though they were priceless treasures. Ethan listened without interrupting. He realized that the richest parts of her life had never depended on money. The hospital came into view, its entrance glowing warmly against the snowy night. Ethan walked beside Lily through the automatic doors. Nurses hurried through bright hallways while families quietly gathered in waiting areas, each carrying their own mixture of hope and uncertainty. A kind nurse approached. Almost immediately. "You must be Lily," she said with a gentle smile. "Your mother has been asking for you." Lily's shoulders relaxed with visible relief. Before following the nurse, she turned toward Ethan. "Will you still be here when I come back out?" she asked. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of complete trust. Ethan remembered the promise he had made only an hour earlier. "I will stay." Those words had come without planning, yet now they felt more important than any contract he had ever signed. He looked directly into her eyes and answered with quiet certainty. "Yes, Lily. I told you I would stay, and I always keep my promises." She smiled, then disappeared down the softly lit hallway with the nurse. Left alone in the waiting room, Ethan noticed the blue backpack still resting beside his chair. In her excitement, Lily had forgotten the one thing she had refused to let go of all evening. He reached toward it, intending only to keep it safe until she returned, but as he carefully lifted it from the floor, the zipper slipped open just enough for a neatly folded handwritten letter and the corner of an old family photograph to become visible. For several seconds Ethan simply stared at the opening in the backpack, feeling as though he had accidentally stepped into someone else's private world. He had no intention of invading Lily's trust. Carefully, he lifted the folded letter that had nearly slipped onto the floor, intending only to tuck it safely back inside. But before he could, one sentence written across the top caught his eye. "If anything happens before I can tell you myself, please remember that none of this was ever your fault." His breath caught. He gently unfolded the page just enough to make certain it belonged with the photograph beside it. The picture showed a smiling woman with soft blonde hair sitting on a park bench, her arm wrapped around a much younger Lily. They were laughing at something outside the frame, surrounded by bright autumn leaves. Written across the bottom in blue ink were the words, "Lincoln Park, our happiest Saturday." Ethan carefully returned the photograph exactly where he had found it, but the letter remained lightly trembling in his hand. He read only the first few lines before quietly folding it again. It was not a goodbye letter. It was a mother's promise that no matter what happened, her daughter should always believe she was deeply loved. There were no complaints, no bitterness, only gentle encouragement reminding Lily to keep reading books, to keep helping strangers, and to never stop believing that kindness always finds its way back. Ethan slowly closed the backpack, suddenly understanding why Lily had guarded it so carefully all evening. It was not filled with valuable possessions. It carried her entire home. A small knitted scarf, carefully folded beside the letter. A library card tucked into a notebook. A bottle of prescription medicine. Several hospital receipts organized with surprising care. Everything inside reflected order, hope, and quiet determination instead of despair. "You found her treasure too, did you?" a gentle voice asked from behind him. Ethan turned to see the same nurse who had welcomed Lily earlier. She smiled warmly as she approached the waiting area. "I am sorry," Ethan replied immediately. "The zipper slipped open when I picked it up. I was only trying to keep it safe." The nurse nodded kindly. "I know. Lily trusts people much more slowly than most children, but when she does, she believes them completely." Ethan glanced toward the hallway where Lily had disappeared. "Has it always just been the two of them?" The nurse sat beside him with a quiet sigh. "For many years. Her mother, Sarah Bennett, worked at the public library until her health forced her to stop. She never asked anyone for special treatment. Even after becoming ill, she spent more energy worrying about Lily than herself." Ethan looked down at the backpack resting beside his chair. Lily waited outside in the cold because she was afraid of missing a phone call. The nurse smiled sadly. "That sounds exactly like her. Every afternoon after school she came here carrying that same backpack. She read books to her mother, helped organize greeting cards from volunteers, and somehow found a way to encourage every patient she met." Ethan remained silent. The picture forming in his mind looked nothing like the headlines he read every morning. The strongest person he had met in months was a 7-year-old girl whose greatest treasure was a backpack full of memories. Just then soft footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lily appeared beside her mother's wheelchair, gently helping guide it forward while the paper bag containing the untouched soup rested carefully across Sarah's lap. The first thing Lily looked for was not the nurse or the elevator. It was Ethan. When she spotted him still waiting exactly where he had promised to be, her entire face lit with relief, and in that quiet smile Ethan realized that keeping one simple promise had already begun changing both of their lives. Sarah Bennett looked far younger than Ethan had imagined. Her face was pale from weeks in the hospital, yet her eyes carried the same quiet warmth he had already seen in Lily. She gently rested one hand on her daughter's shoulder before looking toward Ethan with grateful curiosity. "You must be the gentleman who stayed with my little girl," she said softly. "Thank you for making sure she was not alone." Ethan shook his head almost instinctively. "She was the one who reminded me that no one should have to wait alone." Sarah smiled, and for a brief moment the exhaustion on her face seemed to fade. Lily carefully placed the paper bag onto her mother's lap with unmistakable pride. "I saved the soup for you," she whispered. "It is still warm." Sarah looked inside the bag as though it contained something priceless. "You always think of me first." Lily shrugged with a shy smile. "You always think of me first too." Ethan watched the exchange in complete silence. There was no wealth surrounding this family, no luxury, no certainty about tomorrow, and yet the affection between mother and daughter filled the waiting room more completely than any expensive home he had ever owned. A volunteer quietly wheeled Sarah toward a small family lounge where they could sit together for a few minutes before she returned upstairs. Ethan followed only after Sarah invited him with a gentle gesture. The room overlooked the snowy streets below, where holiday lights reflected across the sidewalks in soft golden colors. Sarah carefully unfolded the napkin beside the soup before speaking again. "Lily tells me you kept your promise." Ethan looked at the little girl sitting beside her mother. "I said I would stay." Sarah nodded slowly. "You would be surprised how many adults make promises to children without realizing how deeply those words matter." Ethan lowered his eyes. Her sentence stirred something he had buried for years. He remembered being 10 years old, sitting beside a hospital window while his own mother smiled through her exhaustion and promised they would visit the lake again when she felt stronger. She had believed those words when she spoke them. So had he. Life had chosen a different ending. Since then, Ethan had quietly stopped making promises whenever possible. Contracts were easier. Numbers were predictable. Feelings were not. Lily interrupted his thoughts by opening her backpack. "Mom, look." She carefully removed a folded piece of paper covered with colorful pencil drawings. It showed a tiny apartment, a bright yellow sun, a park with orange trees, and two smiling figures holding hands beneath a large blue sky. There was one empty figure standing a few steps away. Sarah looked closely at the drawing before asking, "Who is he?" Lily glanced toward Ethan. "I drew him before I met him." Ethan blinked in surprise. "Before tonight?" Lily nodded. "I always imagined that someday someone kind would stop instead of walking past." Sarah gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "She has believed that for a very long time." Ethan stared at the drawing, unable to find words. He had spent years believing success came from planning every outcome, yet this little girl had carried an invisible place for kindness inside her heart long before she ever knew his name. As he looked from the drawing to Lily and then to Sarah, he quietly understood something that every promotion, every award, and every business victory had failed to teach him. Sometimes the most important destination in a person's life is not the place they were trying to reach. It is the unexpected moment that convinces them to stop walking long enough to truly see another human being. The next morning Chicago awoke beneath a sky the color of brushed silver, and for the first time in years Ethan did not begin his day by checking the numbers waiting on his desk. Instead, he found himself standing beside the wide hospital window holding a cup of untouched coffee while watching fresh snow settle quietly across the parking lot. His assistant had already called 3 times. The board meeting had been delayed once, investors were waiting, and a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars required his signature before noon. Under any other circumstances he would have been in the conference room before sunrise. Today he remained exactly where he was. Behind him, Lily sat beside her mother's bed reading aloud from a library book she had pulled from her backpack. Her small voice filled the room with gentle confidence, giving every character its own personality until even the nurses passing through the hallway smiled as they listened. Sarah rested comfortably with her eyes closed, not asleep, simply enjoying the sound of her daughter's voice. Ethan realized that no presentation he had ever attended had commanded a room with such quiet grace. His phone vibrated once again. This time he answered. Mr. Carter, his chief financial officer said immediately, "Everyone is assembled. We cannot postpone this meeting again. The acquisition team from Seattle is already here." Ethan looked through the glass toward Lily, who had reached the funniest page in the story and was laughing softly with her mother. "Then begin without me," he replied. There was a long silence on the other end. "Without you?" "Yes. The board will not understand." Ethan smiled faintly. Perhaps it is time they learned there are some things more important than a schedule. He ended the call before another argument could begin. A few minutes later Sarah looked toward him with quiet concern. "You should not stay here because you feel responsible for us." Ethan gently shook his head. "I am staying because I want to be here." Sarah studied his face for a moment before speaking again. People often believe kindness changes only the person receiving it. She smiled warmly. Sometimes it changes the person giving it even more. Ethan did not answer because he knew she was right. Only yesterday morning he would have described himself as successful. Yet standing in that small hospital room, surrounded by second-hand books, handwritten letters, and simple conversations, he understood how incomplete that definition had been. Lily carefully closed the book and reached into her backpack once more. She removed a small notebook covered with colorful stickers that had begun peeling away at the corners. "Would you like to see my list?" she asked. Ethan moved closer. Every page contained neatly written dreams in careful handwriting. Learn to bake blueberry pie with Mom. Visit the aquarium together. Read 100 library books. Plant a tree. Help someone who feels lonely. The final goal had a small empty square beside it waiting to be checked. Ethan looked at her with curiosity. "You want to help someone who feels lonely?" Lily nodded. "Everybody thinks children are the ones who need help." She smiled gently. "But grown-ups get lonely too. They just hide it better." Her words settled into the quiet room with astonishing honesty. Ethan lowered his eyes, unable to deny the truth she had uncovered so effortlessly. Without another word Lily picked up a blue pencil and carefully placed a tiny check mark beside the last dream on her list. Ethan watched in confusion until she looked up with the brightest smile he had seen yet. "I finished that one yesterday," she said. "I think I helped you a little." The days that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm Ethan had never expected to welcome. Every morning before sunrise he stopped by the neighborhood bakery across from Memorial Hospital, always ordering the same two things, blueberry muffins for Lily and black coffee for himself. It became an unspoken tradition. Lily insisted on breaking each muffin exactly in half before taking a bite. "Good things are better when they are shared," she would say with complete certainty, sliding the larger piece toward Ethan every single time. He always protested. She always ignored him. Sarah grew stronger with each passing day, and although her recovery would require patience, hope had returned to the room in ways that no medicine alone could explain. Nurses who once entered quietly now lingered for a few extra moments just to hear Lily's latest library story or one of Ethan's unexpectedly clumsy attempts at reading funny character voices. Even the waiting room no longer felt like a place filled only with uncertainty. One snowy afternoon Ethan received another call from his office. This time it was not about contracts or investors. His executive assistant spoke carefully. Sir, the board has noticed the changes. They are asking whether you truly intend to reduce executive travel and expand the employee family assistance program you mentioned. Ethan looked through the hospital window where Lily was teaching her mother how to fold paper snowflakes from old magazines. Their laughter echoed softly down the hallway. Yes, he answered without hesitation. And schedule another meeting next week. I have additional ideas. After ending the call, he walked into Sarah's room carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate instead of coffee. Lily's eyes grew wide with excitement. Is something special happening? She asked. Ethan smiled. I think it already has. Over the next several weeks, the plans that had once existed only as quiet thoughts slowly became real. Carter Logistics announced paid family emergency leave for every employee, expanded medical assistance for hourly workers, and created partnerships with public libraries throughout Chicago to provide free children's reading programs. When reporters asked why one of the city's most successful chief executive officers had suddenly changed direction, Ethan declined every interview. The story is not about me, he simply replied. Meanwhile, Lily continued adding small check marks inside her notebook. Read another library book. Watch the snow fall with Mom. Eat blueberry muffins together. Every dream she completed seemed wonderfully ordinary, yet Ethan realized those ordinary moments were exactly what gave life its deepest meaning. On the morning Sarah was finally cleared to leave the hospital, Lily carefully packed her backpack one more time. The handwritten letter, the family photograph, the library card, the scarf, and the notebook all returned to their familiar places. Ethan noticed one new addition resting inside beside the blue pencil. It was the paper cup sleeve from the very first hot chocolate they had shared at the cafe. You kept that? He asked with gentle surprise. Lily nodded. Because that was the night everything started getting warmer. Ethan looked down, unable to hide his smile. As they stepped outside together, fresh snow drifted gently across the parking lot, covering yesterday's footprints until the ground looked untouched again. But Ethan understood something the snow could never erase. Some journeys begin with enormous decisions. Others begin because someone chooses to stop, to listen, and to believe that even the quietest whisper deserves an answer. And once that choice is made, neither life can ever return to what it was before. Spring arrived quietly in Chicago, replacing the gray winter skies with mornings washed in pale blue and trees dressed in fresh green leaves. Months had passed since the evening that changed 3 lives forever, yet Ethan still found himself taking the same route home whenever work allowed. He no longer measured his days only by meetings completed or contracts signed. Instead, he remembered moments. A shared blueberry muffin. A paper snowflake taped to a hospital window. A little girl's laughter echoing down a hallway that had once felt impossibly silent. Carter Logistics had changed in ways even longtime employees struggled to believe. Family reading corners appeared in office buildings. Volunteer days at public libraries became company traditions. Emergency assistance funds quietly helped families through difficult seasons without publicity or headlines. Whenever reporters asked what inspired the transformation, Ethan simply smiled and said that the greatest lessons rarely came from boardrooms. One sunny Saturday afternoon, he received a handwritten invitation decorated with tiny blue stars. It read, Spring Reading Celebration at Lincoln Park Library. I really hope you come. Your reserved seat is waiting. Love, Lily. Ethan arrived early, wearing a simple navy jacket instead of a tailored business suit. The small library buzzed with children carrying books nearly as large as they were, parents chatting softly, and volunteers arranging colorful paper flowers across the stage. Sarah greeted him with a warm hug that carried the strength she had slowly regained over the previous months. She has been watching the front door for 20 minutes, Sarah whispered with a smile. She was afraid you might have another important meeting. Ethan looked toward the first row where one small chair had a handwritten card resting on it. Reserved for my friend Ethan. His throat tightened. Moments later the program began. One by one the children stepped onto the stage to read short passages from their favorite stories. Finally Lily walked to the microphone carrying the same worn blue backpack that had accompanied her through every chapter of her journey. It looked older now, but it remained carefully stitched together, just like the life she and her mother had rebuilt. She smiled at the audience before opening a small notebook. "Today I want to read something I wrote myself," she announced. The room grew wonderfully quiet. People sometimes think heroes wear capes or become famous. I think heroes are people who stop walking when everyone else keeps going. Heroes listen when a voice is almost too quiet to hear. They keep promises even after nobody is watching. And sometimes they help someone without knowing that they are being helped too. Ethan lowered his eyes, feeling every word settle gently into his heart. When the applause faded, Lily climbed down from the stage and walked directly toward him. From her backpack she carefully removed a folded drawing. It showed a little girl beneath a winter street lamp, a black sport utility vehicle parked nearby, and a tall man standing beside an open car door. Above them the snow had been replaced by bright spring sunshine. At the bottom she had written in careful blue letters, "Thank you for hearing my whisper." Ethan accepted the drawing with both hands as though it were the most valuable gift he had ever received. He smiled through grateful eyes and quietly realized that his greatest success would never appear in an annual report or hang inside a glass office. It would live in simple promises kept, ordinary moments shared, and the quiet certainty that true wealth had never been measured by what he owned, but by the lives that became warmer because he chose to stop, to listen, and to care.